Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, we hope you have a great Labor Day weekend, and we're going to talk on Pennsylvania Newsmakers about many aspects of our economy. As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, we've got many aspects of the economy and some other subjects to talk about. Joining me to do that is Abe Amoros. He's the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Diversity Officer with the Pennsylvania Municipal League. And Gene Barr, he's Senior Advisor with GSL Public Affairs. And of course, before that, he was President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber. Gene, you've been on the program for a good bit of time. I have to ask you, what's GSL before we move along too far?
Well, first, it's great to be back here to see you again and be able to talk about some of these issues. And GSL is a subsidiary, public advocacy subsidiary of the law firm Stevens & Lee.
Okay.
That's been some of my post-retirement activity.
There you go. So you're not retired.
Not fully, no.
I understand that. All right. I think as we pass through Labor Day, we have to talk about the economy. Highlight some of the significant aspects of the economy that we all need to be aware of.
Well, look, it looks like after a long time where inflation has stubbornly hung up there and we've had high interest rates in order to try and tamp that down, it has worked. The stock market is at highs. There's still a lot of anxiety out there because, of course, prices are still high. Housing prices are up, et cetera, so there are still some issues, as there always are in the economy, that need to be resolved. And
sure.
Of course, it's not a continuum, as you know, it's more cyclical than anything else. So we're seeing another one of those interesting cycles in the economy.
Yeah. Take your turn.
It's good to see you, Terry. I'm a big fan of your work over the years, and I'm glad to be back on your program as well. And I'm happy to report that the economy has grown by 3% in the second quarter, which is a good economic indicator. But to Gene's point, there is a lot of angst out there still with the high cost of high cost of food, high cost of fuel. So those are all real indicators. And of course, heading into an election year, we have to put all of that in perspective. But we still have record low unemployment, record job growth. So things are moving in the right direction, but they just have not filtered down to the voters yet.
Yeah, and the economy is likely, as we know, as it virtually is in every presidential election, to be an important issue, correct?
Well, I mean, the old statement, James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, no matter when you go in, it's what people are feeling. As Abe said, sometimes it goes beyond the statistics. It's kind of what their gut feel is. Are they anxious about it? Are they moving ahead? Are their kids moving ahead? So it's a tough one to do, and it's not just numbers, it's how people are feeling.
Yeah, take that part of it.
Well, I think he's right. It's a feeling. People don't really gravitate towards statistics and facts sometimes.
Yeah.
It's how they're impacted in their own homes when they open
and their
the cupboard.
families, more broadly speaking.
Absolutely, and now that we're going back to school, it's even more important because families have budgets, and those budgets are a set of priorities for them as well. So it's important to put all of that in perspective.
Yeah, that's all important. All right, let's move on to another subject, Gene, and that's something that's referred to as, and I have to almost read this, the Resilient States Project, the Resilient States Project. What is it, and what does it do?
Great question. It's the reason why Abe and I are both here. We're part of, I guess it's a state advisory commission.
That is correct, yes.
Common Ground USA, which is an organization that also operates, they have an international subsidiary to talk about trying to resolve conflicts across the globe, has created this Resilient States Project in light of the kind of the tension that we see, the quote culture wars, the push and pull, the vitriol we see, the sometimes lack of civility that we see in our public and daily discourse. And
so it's just not in politics. It's
not in politics. It's across there, and it manifests itself. And so the prime goal is to stop any kind of violence ahead of the 2024 election. And by violence, not just physical, but threats of intimidation, verbal abuse, et cetera. And we're one of 4 states. It's Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, and Arizona Arizona that have been selected for kind of special attention to try and tamp down the rhetoric, turn down the heat to a large degree.
All right, well, look, let's run to a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you the same question to talk about that, and then we have to talk about the role of business leaders, which we will get to following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we're talking about a number of important subjects that deal with the economy, and Labor Day weekend is a perfect time to do that. I want to go to Abe Amoros to talk about aspects of the economy. Take it.
Sure. The economy, as you know, is something that everybody talks about, everybody thinks about, and it's part of a discourse as it relates to politics as well, since we're entering into a big election year. So communicating effectively with each other and putting things in perspective is really a good, this is really a good time to begin thinking about that.
Right.
Not just with family, but with friends, with coworkers, people you go to church with, people you see at the supermarket. So it's really important that we put everything in perspective in terms of the election.
All right, Gene talked about the Resilient States Project. Pick up on that.
Yes, the Resilient States Project, and Gene mentioned 4 states. It's no coincidence that they're all swing states. And this is where the dialogue and the temperature.
So in other words, you're saying there's a relationship between the economy and the politics.
Absolutely, without question. And to Gene's point earlier about James Carville's quote, it's the economy. It's all about the economy. And so what we have to do is we have to start looking at it as taking the temperature down on some of the extremism that exists out there. And unfortunately, we see it in Pennsylvania. We saw, sadly, an assassination attempt in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania last month. Yeah. This is unacceptable. This is intolerable. And we need to recognize that this is a serious issue and that we all have a role to play in terms of taking that temperature down and communicating with people. You know, 89% in a recent poll believe that we have more in common than we have in terms of differences and are not big fans of some of the fighting that's taking place right now. Whether you open up a newspaper, whether you turn on the television set, you see conflict, you see division, and you see this hyper-partisanship, which is leading to just ugliness. And this project really aims to give people tools to turn that temperature down, turn the heat down. Let's talk to each other and proactively listen.
But it also has to do with, you know, intervening in terms of dealing with violence mitigation.
Absolutely. And so the group, the Common Ground group, is a very interesting one. It's a very diverse group of people. So you've got military veterans represented, you've got faith-based groups, you've got business, you've got labor, to try and develop those networks to get at what Abe was saying, which is how do we push down to say, guys, let's take this rhetoric down a bit. And in all honesty, elected officials have a big part in this too. Look, we've all heard and we've all seen when someone takes up the notch and they attack their opponent or others in a very bitter fashion. That gets
Common Ground there you can see on the screen. Go ahead.
That gets communicated. And so the goal of our group is working together through our networks to try and tamp that down. As Abe said, we're one of 4 states. Pennsylvania is a swing state, and unfortunately, Pennsylvania has one of, if not the highest number of threats against elected officials. Election officials are already seeing threats made against them based on things that have happened years ago. And that's extremely unfortunate because these literally are our neighbors. I worked the polls for years where I grew up in Delaware County, and these are literally your neighbors who are working these polls.
Yeah, I mean, political violence is not new, certainly, and dealing with it does require more involvement than just by the law enforcement officials.
That's absolutely right. We've got to get adults in the room that can talk to each other, ask pointed questions, delve into what is really concerning them, and then asking them where are they getting their information from, and really analyzing where those echo chambers are. Some of them are extremist echo chambers, and I'm going to be honest, it's on both sides. One party is no better than the other in terms of the extremism, and we as a society have to be responsible in taking that temperature down and talking to our friends and our neighbors and asking them, why do you feel a certain way? I had an opportunity to do this at a conference in Napa Valley 2 weeks ago, talking to someone who was just completely adamant against a candidate. And I asked pointed questions, and at the end, she realized that her vitriol was not justified as much as she thought it was.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like it's growing. It's not getting weaker, is it?
Look, I mean, you're an historian as well as a political scientist, so you know that a lot of this is cyclical. We've talked about the violence we've had. We're old enough to remember, you know, the assassination attempts on Reagan, the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, the assassination of attempts on many, many others. That's unfortunately not anything new in this country, even in the last 50 or 75 years. So, but we've got to stop that and make sure that those events don't lead to a much bigger problem.
That leads me to another question. We're going to run to a break. When I talk about what you folks need to do, I'm talking about you folks in the business community.
Sure.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're talking about many aspects of the economy, and one aspect of it we got to earlier, and I want to pick up on it again, and that has to do with what is basically referred to as common ground.
Yeah, let's talk first a little bit about, I'd like to touch on something that Abe said first about how people get their news these days. And unfortunately what has happened is, as you know, the way that has evolved significantly. You hate to keep bashing social media, but people tend to get into their social media where they're seeing the same thing, and a lot of times it's very hyperbolic attacks in terms of, you know, against other folks. And what we encourage as part of Common Ground is go out and listen to some other viewpoints. And one of the things that I'm tremendously concerned about, that we know virtually for a fact, intelligence communities have seen this, that many foreign actors are engaged in trying to create these divisions within the American society. So you've got Russia, China, North Korea, Iran that are filtering into social media, and they've checked it because a lot of these sites go back to these countries. They have a vested interest in destroying the republic that we have here, and so get out, listen to others. If you're hearing something outlandish or seeing something crazy on Facebook, go check it out. Please don't just share this stuff.
Sure. Abe, I used to tell, when I was in the classroom, my students all the time that they had to check out the left wing as well as the right wing media.
Correct.
That they were obligated to make sure they were getting multiple points of view on the issues and on the candidates.
That's absolutely right. Now, I'm going to say this. I have a degree in journalism from Penn State, so I gravitate to objectivity, which was required of all of us in our reporting inside and outside of the classroom. That objectivity has eroded because people are going into their respective corners and just listening to things that they want to hear. We have this fabulous handout on the website, cg.usa.org, and it's entitled 50 Things Individuals Can Do to Participate in This Process. One of them is going outside of that bubble.
I'll tell you,
and your
people are
comfort
pretty
zone.
negative about politics in the polls that
Yes, sir.
that I've seen. I'm not into the polling business
That is one side.
anymore.
That's one thing both sides share very significantly.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn to another subject, and that, Gene, and I'll ask you first. What is the role of business leaders in all of this?
Well, that's a great question. And in fact, this organization, Common Ground, has resources for business leaders, and we encourage them to talk as we've talked here. That is, take down the temperature, deal honestly with your employees, encourage them to vote, encourage them to get out, encourage them, because we are seeing issues in the workplace where these things start leading into heated arguments in the lunchroom.
Right.
I've heard about that. So what can business leaders do? One, they need to make sure that, of course, that's not acceptable. We need to turn the heat down here, and we've given those folks some suggestions on that. Be honest with people if something happens. Be honest with something if there's an issue in your community, in your neighborhood. Tell them about it. Tell them why that's not how we deal with this. And again, in addition to business leaders, our other leaders, our political leaders, as I said earlier, are obligated to do this too. One of the things that truly disturbs me anymore when I hear something, someone doesn't like something that either Congress or Supreme Court or the president does, they question the legitimacy of the institution. We have run down our institutions in this country, and that needs to end.
We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you the same question, and then we've got to get to long-term solutions.
Sure.
Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Well, we made a decision that we were going to devote the entire program to these important topics that are hugely important to us in our society, not just in the business community, but our society as a whole. And I'm delighted that we're able to do it. All right, Abe, let's continue the discussion about the role of business leaders.
Well, the role of business leaders, like any group of leaders, whether they be faith-based or labor leaders, is to really influence those around them in a very positive and constructive way. And I'm very pleased to see that business leaders are taking a more responsible approach to educate their workforce, to educate the ones that they're trying to influence and their stakeholders as well. And one of the good things that we're doing at Common Ground is also putting out initiatives like our Love Feast, for instance, where basically we have a program, and we had a big webinar on it last week, where we invite 10 to 20 people over to a home to have a meal and talk, eyeball to eyeball, face to face, and enjoy something.
You think there's not enough discussion in this age now with all this modern communication where we don't interact personally enough?
You're right about that. You know, Gene made a comment about social media. Now, it's good and bad, but I have to be honest here. I'm not on a lot of social media platforms because of some of the things that I see that go unchecked and are bent towards division and hatred, and that's not something that we.
That's why the balance I talked about is very important, right?
There has to be a balance there, Terry, because if we don't do that, if we don't seek to understand each other, we're never going to get along.
But folks like you in the business community have to take the lead in this, don't you?
Well, I think we all have to take the lead. I think business leaders
that's a great point.
I think elected officials have to, faith-based veterans. That's why, on the labor side, I think that's why this is such a very powerful, diverse organization that has been put together. The other thing, too, when we talk about some of the things that certainly I see and I think we all share, is that now when you get on social media, again, a lot of bashing the social media, but unfortunately, you will say something about someone or something that you would never say directly to that individual. And again, most of the time, you're saying it to people who say, oh, yeah, that's right, that's right, that's right. But no, we do not talk to people across the other side of the aisle or across the divide. And that's unfortunate because I think people know that that's the case. People know that we should be doing that. And the statistics show that people acknowledge that. But unfortunately, we tend to see it, and as I said, a lot of the information that's out there driven by foreign actors are tending and designed to divide us and separate us.
That's right.
If you had to mention two or three things, long-term solutions to some of these problems, and you were the head and could make these decisions, what would you say?
Well, several things. First of all, I look at it two ways, from now to the election and between the election and the swearing in. Because one group is going to be severely disappointed with the election results, and we have to deal with that disappointment in constructive ways. So the first thing we need to do is be willing to have conversations with people.
And that's a major long-term solution, you think?
That's one of the major long-term solutions. Another major long-term solution, really, is to educate people how things actually work. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And sadly, the echo chambers are louder and more obnoxious. But, you know, Gene was talking about statistics. One that I'd like to point out is that a majority of Americans do not believe things are as bad as leaders want them to believe. That's a fascinating statistic. It's not as bad as things as it appears, but yet the echo chambers, because they're louder, because they're more obnoxious, because they're well-funded, they're out there in your ear every day. So you're going to pick up on it, especially if you're not fact-checking. You've got to fact-check everything in today's society.
You agree with that?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about leaders today. I think it's absolutely incumbent upon business leaders to educate their employees and to stand for things in the community, for our religious faith-based leaders, for labor leaders, and for military veterans to talk about how important all of this is. They can help take the temperature down.
You would argue that that's a significant long-term solution.
I would, because look, we've looked at the numbers, we looked at what our statistics show, we looked at what surveys show. That is, people know that this is wrong. They don't like this temperature, but they're trying to figure out how they can get to it. So people we all need this guidance that helps us get there, whether it's at the family dinner table, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the congregation, wherever it is, at your local Rotary Club, et cetera. We have to have leaders who are willing to stop and say, no, we're not going to take it in that direction. We're going to talk about this, and we're going to figure out how we can work together and come up with some solutions here.
All right, we have about less than a minute left. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
I am optimistic about the future. I think we see a lot of things moving in the right direction. And like Gene said, it's incumbent upon all of us to take a decisive role and really stimulate others to do the same, because we have to assume the roles of leaders as well.
Yeah, you agree?
I'm optimistic because, and you and I both have seen this, when you go back and you look in the early 70s, late 60s, how bad this was.
We're out of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Not a problem.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.